Third time's a charm. All right, so I haven't yet seen any of the comments on my videos. I haven't looked at them yet, but I know that I had to, in my reason why we are basically, humans are innately religious, I had to show that there wasn't one mother culture that then everybody broke off of, so that's why, it's just a cultural thing, it's just passed down that way, and there's an independent people, if people were independent or naturally grew up, they would be atheistic. So I had to show the migration of people out of Africa and into what is now Syria, and that they were there for a long time, and then two groups broke off from that group, and so on and so on. And it wasn't in depth, and it was just general. But in there, I mentioned, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that, the only controversial part of it is mentioning the fact that Aboriginal Australian people, the Aborigines of Australia, a group of them made it to modern day Argentina, which means I might have a fraction of one of them might be my ancestors. And that pre-Columbus and pre-Viking Europe's, and I'm talking about Stone Age people from Europe, or possibly also from Asia, Stone Age Caucasoid people made it to the New World. And this is pre-Clovis. And that the Clovis people aren't first peoples. Now, does that mean that the Native Americans of today aren't the first peoples? No, because people mix. And invariably, they're going to have some of these, what gets called Solutrean, but I don't think that's correct, because I think there were waves of people coming from, and I think it shows in the culture, in the language, and also in the genes, or in the what is it called? Not heredity, but in their genetic heritage, right? In their patronage or parentage or whatever. I know the word, I'm just searching for it, but people, some reason, take issue with this. Also, when I was in a Japanese class learning about Japanese history, right? And the teacher was Japanese. He was from Japan. I don't think he liked me very much because, people said, well, what do people know about Japanese people? And I said, I mentioned Pearl Harbor, and that freaked him out. And I'm like, what? That was my grandparents. That was their thing. Where were you when Pearl Harbor happened? My parents' generation, where were you when JFK was shot? Our generation, where were you when 9/11 happened? But I hear about 9/11. I don't think when people talk about 9/11, they're associating it with all Arabs. So, but anyways, in that class, he's like, Japan was initially, in the Stone Age, was ruled by white people, basically, Aryans, and then the primary ancestor of modern-day Japanese people began in Okinawa, and they moved up, and to this day, there are still indigenous Caucasoid people, or I think he just said white people, in Hokkaido, Japan. You can look at photographs, and older photographs you get, you see, oh my gosh, there were. And they're slowly melding in with other Japanese people. There are idiots out there in the white nationalist community who say that that's a genocide, they're erasing our culture. You idiot. They're from Japan. They've lived in Japan since the Stone Age. They're Japanese. They're not, yes, they are Caucasoid, right? Idiots would call them Aryan, not knowing what an Aryan is. But, okay, so you would consider them white, a Westerner like you. But they're native to Japan. They're Japanese. Japanese people consider them Japanese. It's idiotic, right? you're not speaking for them. You're not of them. You can't speak for them. So at the same rate, you look at things in the Americas, and just like, people usually didn't get genocided. It's not really possible when taking over land. What happens is they get interbred. That's mostly what happened. It's usually sickness. Well, in the case of the Americas, they had no immunity to our diseases, any European or Arab or whatever, but let's just European for the time being, of the diseases. But even when I say I have some ancestry that goes back to the people who got wiped out by the diseases. I mean, there was a plague that took 80% of all indigenous Central Americans. And this was after cholera had taken 20% of their population. But I don't get where, on both sides, on the side of people who are really almost like Native American Indian, like supremacist, and then the other side that's like white power people. And white nationalism is stupid. I believe in nationalism, but how the hell can you be a white nationalist or a black nationalist? It doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous. So, I mean, you can see there's the mound builders, right? Like, that's Neolithic Ireland and Scotland. It was probably waves of people. And we even find common characteristics, common things like round boats and certain Gaelic words in a culture by the Missouri River. And just so happens that the only people in Europe that make round boats are the Welsh, who speak a Gaelic language. And Gaelic is pretty much over in Europe. I mean, there's only a few thousand speakers of it and there's variation between Welsh, Scottish, and Irish of what the Celtic language was. But yeah, I think it's stupid that people that you're saying my ancestors were. Well, we know they're not 100% Clovis people. Wouldn't that be good to hear? Like, that's much more interesting. Because there's no people. I mean, look at England. For example, the English aren't descended from the indigenous Britons. I mean, they were from Sweden and Germany and Netherlands and Denmark. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes. So, and even then, when the Anglo-Saxons first got there, they weren't English. It took them to become landed people who, instead of being raiders, were farming and, producing things and trading. And then, even then, Anglo-Saxon Britain really isn't Angleland or England until the Norman Conquest, who were Vikings that had settled in France. And before the 20th century, Italy wasn't a thing. Italy was there was no country of Italy. There were just different small countries that were made up of warring city-states. And look at the Incas. The Incas claimed to be the first civilization. Well, who built Tiwanaku? Oh, the gods. Well, it's obviously some of their ancestors built it, but then that identity disappeared, and then you had the Incas arise. The Teotihuacanes were long gone by the time Columbus got here, or Cortez. But, you had the Aztecs. Were the Aztecs the descendants of the Teotihuacanes? Probably some of them were. So this idea of even the Native Americans, right? The land. Before Columbus got here, 100 years before Columbus got here, the Powhatan had taken away, had driven the Cherokee up into the mountains, right? The Cherokee used to be a sea-based people, coastal people. They were driven up into the mountains. And then when jackass Andrew Jackson came along, he forced them to Oklahoma. And the United States government also forced the Apache to Florida. But before you had the clothed man, as the Native American called them, before you had the great colonial period of after 1492, the Native Americans themselves were driving each other away from places. Like every Indian reserve, that's not where those people came from. They came from a different place. And people throughout history, that's the one thing you'll see, is they're always shifting. There's very few people, I think it's just like the Irish are one of the few peoples who have just stayed where they were. And they've been invaded by Vikings and English and Scottish people a lot. Very few people. Maybe the Bushmen of Africa and the Irish are the only two groups I can think of, are the only exceptions to the rule of everybody's moving around constantly. And that's usually probably because Ireland is not the most desirable location if you're coming out of the Mediterranean, or even out of the rest of Europe, where it's got better farming weather. All right, peace to you. So I think, because I can just foresee wacky, crazy, batshit comments on that video of like shouts of rape, or that's incorrect. I gave a general overview of the migration of peoples. So that's all I wanted to say. And I think both extremes are fucking nuts, as you already know. We're one in Christ. Remember Paul said, in Christ we're all equal to God. So saying, the Eurasian, which is everybody except the sub-Saharan African, the sub-Saharan Black African, the indigenous people of Papua New Guinea, and the Aboriginal Australian, everyone else, the Eurasian, the Mongoloid, and the Caucasoid, are closer together than any of them are to the what's called and these are all archaic terms, Negroid people. Yeah, that's true. But we're all still human beings. It's super ridiculous. So what if all Asians and Europeans and what quote-unquote Native Americans have Neanderthal blood in them, yet the Black African doesn't? So what? What's the takeaway? And people mention IQ and shit like that, and it's like, yeah, maybe generally, but that probably more has to do with culture and situation than it does with being, a natural thing. Like, Chinese people or Japanese people are always going to be the smartest people, and black people are only good for being athletes. That's, some people conclude that, which is ridiculous. It's like, there's a professional basketball player from China, and Neil deGrasse Tyson is black, so he's a physicist, so shut up. Like, it's ridiculous. So both extremes, I think, are idiotic. So this is just my pre-response video to comments I foresee. Peace to you.